Welcome to tryScrum webinar series 10. This is a 10th webinar in about 10 weeks. So we started around exactly 10 weeks ago with Dave Snowden talking about rewilding agility. Now we have our 10th webinar series powered by tryScrum Studio in partnership with Agile Leadership Studio. Today's topic is pretty exciting for me, at least. I don't know, most of us should be excited when we hear about secrets, right? So that too, we are hearing about 3 secrets on Agile leadership from Peter Stevens. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
Okay, so before I formally hand it over to you and introduce you, I'm going to just run through the tech setup. It's pretty usual. The logistics part is that every one of the participants would be muted. And you can post your questions in the Q&A window. We would be trying to accommodate as much questions as possible. If we could not accommodate any questions, it is not intentional. It's probably due to respecting the time box. So that's on the logistics part. Next, about us, who are we? We are tryScrum. We are a coaching, consulting, and a training organization. Our mission is to humanize organizations. We are a PDN network of Scrum.org, and we are also Scrum Alliance member, and we are also ICAGL authorized organization. We run coaching workshops on it, and also we do Management 3.0 workshops as well. We run 3 studios, one for people part, we run Scrum Master Studio. Next is for the product owners, we run Product Owner Studio, and we run for leaders, Agile Leadership Studio, targeting specific content or specific areas of interest to the people. That's on the tryScrum Studios. It's high time I introduce Peter. Peter Stevens, speaker, he's an author, and he's an executive coach, and also he is a certified Scrum Trainer from Scrum Alliance. Right. So Peter hails from Swiss, and he started his career as a software developer in Microsoft. Then he's also a co-founder of Personal Agility Institute and then the World Agility Forum. A slight word of mention about World Agility Forum. So we ourselves, they call for awards. tryScrum has nominated ourselves for the community initiative. So if you want any details, you can go and visit the World Agility Forum as well. And Peter recently completed his book, 10 Agile Contracts. If any of you guys are fascinated about how do we go about with the contracts and with vendor service models and all different models, there are 10 Agile Contracts. That's more of it's a practitioner guide created by Peter. So you can have a look at that. I have the book's picture put up there as well. He's also in his writing his second book, Personal Agility, Hope for the Overworked. So we're waiting for it, Peter. Without taking not so much of time, I'm handing it over to Peter. Peter, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Arun, and thank you for the introduction. I almost don't know what I'm going to say with my first 3 slides because that introduction was so complete. So thank you very much. What I'd like to do is see if I can switch my screen. Yes, it's going to let me do that. Okay, and so at this point, you should now see my version of your cover slide. Okay, excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the welcome. So make sure all the buttons work here. Excellent, yes. Okay, so before we get started, what I'd like to do is kind of invite everyone, let's find out how the chat works. And I'm kind of curious to see who's here and who's participating today. So we've got a number of different skills here. What I'd like you to do is, kind of put your name, where you're from, and where if any of these labels apply to you, who do you think you are? And if none of the labels apply to you, that's okay too. Just put in your, put in your role. So let's see if we can break the internet here. So, on 3, I'd like everybody to enter the answer to this question. Okay, so, kind of, who are you? Where are you from? Oh, by the way, I guess my day job is I'm a Scrum Trainer, originally from the US, at this very instant, I'm sitting in Zurich, Switzerland. And okay, yes. So, but we're not breaking the internet here yet. I've seen Gaurav, a couple of Agilists, oh, lots of Agilists. Okay, Agile leadership role, I like that. Scrum Master from Singapore, Ravi from the UK, oh, amazing. So we've got like half the world represented here. Noida, Sri Lanka, ah, okay. Oh, Elmi, good to see you, Elmi. You're in my personal agility class. Yes, okay, or actually Janani's personal agility class, I should say. Okay, Singapore. Catherine from Zurich, oh, awesome, wow, okay. Okay, from Chennai. Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome everybody. Let's. I'm just going to say a couple words about me. Most of the logos and things you've already heard of, but let me just show you a picture of me having a little bit of fun in Seattle, Washington, about 3 years ago. This is me at Joe Justice's WikiSpeed factory, where my son and I are learning to apply agility to the problem of building cars. Okay, and one of the key skills, or one of the key patterns of the WikiSpeed approach, or extreme manufacturing as we call it, is pairing. And in my own work as an executive coach, I've discovered that pairing is a hugely powerful pattern, not just for people, kind of at the operational level doing the work, but especially for executives and other agile leaders who are trying to change their companies. If you got two people who are aligned in agreement about what the problem is and what needs to be done about it, well, that's just huge, because they're extremely well positioned to to solve problems together. Okay, now we talked about questions. We're going to put questions in the chat. I'm also going to give you this tiny URL. If you want to reach out to me and ask me a question, be sure to leave me your name and email address there as well. And if we can't get to your question during the talk, then I will try to come back to you on if you leave me a question there. Okay, and I put this funny URL in the chat window. Okay, so we're talking about executives, leaders, and agility. Now, I've had the opportunity to work with the senior executives of a number of organizations, both in Europe and in Asia. And one of the things I noticed is a lot of similarity in the sorts of questions they're asking. Okay, the first is like, what are all the buzzwords about? Okay, now when they say buzzwords, what is this telling you? Well, it means these folks really don't have any clue what agility is really about. It's something that's been happening down there at the operational level. And most executives haven't spent time in a delivery team. So, all of these agile concepts are pretty strange to them. After they get past the questions of, understanding what it's about, then they start asking questions about what it's going to do for their organization. So things like innovation, innovating faster, getting people to talk to each other. How do you develop better products? All these, really, questions about how can we be better at doing our business. And then eventually, once they start seeing how it's going to help them with their business, they start asking the more personal questions. How can I make it a success? Or perhaps even, what does it mean to me? Okay, and the answers are sometimes a little bit scary, because change is scary for everybody, especially people, at the top of an organization. Now, I'm not here to try to change anyone's mind or change anyone's mindset. This is a really difficult thing to do. But what I hope I can do is give you some new ideas. And this, by the way, is also something I try to do in my classes. Let you experience something or see something from a different way. This is called a change in perspective. Okay. Now, your mindset, your attitude, that's the sum of all your experience, everything you've ever done. Okay. You don't change someone's mindset with facts. But if you can give them a new perspective, if they can see things in a different way, well, they can chew on it themselves. And that will let them to change their own mindset, and that will in turn change their own behavior. Okay, so this is by inviting people to think, giving them the problem. This is a key way to start conversations and affect long-term change. So what I'd like to do today is I'd like to talk. We said, okay, secrets of agile leadership. Well, what does this agile word mean? Okay, and a lot of people. There are people saying, well, we're past agile, agile is dead. There are all kinds of, people are saying all kinds of silly things about agile. And so I'd like to share my perspective on what it means to be agile, what this word means. Then we'll get into the 3 secrets. And then I'd like to share with you, if we have some time, a little bit about the personal agility system and why that might be. We're actually seeing that personal agility is a gateway to agility for people in a leadership role. And so why you might want to get involved with that. So let's start with the first question. What does it mean to be agile? How many of you have heard of the Agile Manifesto? Okay, I can't really see you here, so I'm just gonna have to take your word for it that probably most people have. The Agile Manifesto was kind of the start of the word agile in the modern sense. It was kind of a bottom-up thing. What happened after that is, well, I'm going to be a little bit blunt here and say management discovered it, tried to make it their own. And when people say agile is dead or agile is painful or awful or developers hate it, well, usually it has to do with this fake agility, which is basically putting on the clothes but not really adopting the mindset. And then finally, more recently, we have something of a synthesis. I think Steve Denning is the first management author who's really understood what agility means for leadership, and he's tried to make that explainable in a couple of words. So let's kind of look at agility from these three perspectives. Okay. Now, a lot of people think, oh, we're using Jira, that makes us agile. We're doing SAFe, this makes us agile. We're doing Scrum or Kanban or whatever. And all of these practices, these were created by people with an agile mindset to help them do their work, okay? But just doing any of them, and I say this as a Scrum trainer, just doing Scrum doesn't make you agile. Agile is something much deeper, almost more philosophical. Now, the term agile was basically coined by what is more formally known as the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. 17 people looking for better ways to develop software, but also trying to come up with some commonality between their approaches, got together at the Snowboard Lodge in Utah. And, besides skiing and drinking and whatever else one does at a lodge in the middle of winter, they came up with this manifesto. And I'd like to look at the key parts of it closely. Now, most people, they talk about those 4 value pairs, and maybe they talk about the sentence in the bottom. So yeah, we still write documentation, but I want to look at the top line, these first 2 statements. So the first statement of the manifesto and the first principle of the manifesto. We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others to do it. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Now, what can we find in these words? Here, I think we're defining the agile mindset. So the first thing we have is learning. We're always uncovering a better way. We're not looking for the best practice. We're always looking for a better practice. Collaboration, okay? We're doing things and we're helping other people to do it. Oh, and by the way, this is a very peer-to-peer thing. Developers helping other developers, okay? And finally, our highest priority, purpose, okay? So an agilist not only knows what they're doing, they know why they're doing it, okay? To enable them to achieve their mission. So agility is learning, collaboration, and purpose. And if we look at the complexity of software projects, these are the core skills that you need, or the core values that you need in order to master the complexity of things like product development, especially computer software product development, okay? Now, this search for better ways, this actually did uncover better ways. And eventually management heard about it and said, oh yeah, this is great, okay? Or management got told about it and had maybe a slightly different reaction. And this is something that we've seen a lot, where we go to our leadership and say, hey, we got a better way to create products. And they say, well, you can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't impact my bonus, okay? And so you've got this kind of, well, we talked about the glass ceiling in other contexts. There's the people doing the work and the people leading the companies, and they kind of don't really talk to each other. The other alternative is kind of just the opposite. They say, this is wonderful. Okay, guys, make it so. Talk, talk. We're agile. Mission accomplished. Do Scrum or whatever else they ask for. And the rest of the organization is just overwhelmed with practices. In fact, when I talk to successful implementations of SAFe, the main complaint I hear about it is not that it's bad. It's just that there's so much, and you have to filter through all of this stuff to figure out what you really need to do. Okay, so just dumping a lot of agile practices on people doesn't really help them achieve what they're trying to achieve or get better at producing value for the organization or for customers. Okay, but with this kind of commanded mindset, this tends to produce an agility which is not very friendly to people and kind of burns people out. And I think this is where all the hate, directed at agility is coming from. It's from organizations that are trying to apply it, but their first attempts aren't going very well. Now, in the meantime, there are companies that are doing it or trying to do it and doing a reasonably good job at it. And Steve Denning started looking at these organizations, meeting with these organizations, looking for patterns. And what came out of that, and he documents this in his book, The Age of Agile, the first thing he talked about is the law of the customer. Okay, so all of the companies that he considers to be agile, they have this intense focus on customers, not just their existing customers, but also new customers. Okay, so for instance, Amazon is constantly innovating new products. Their IT services went from being a point of cost to a source of revenue. The law of the network. Okay, information flows without friction through the organization. This enables you to seize opportunities. It enables you to fix problems quickly. Okay, and this is actually one of the big challenges of hierarchical organizations, because the need to keep things in control sometimes comes in conflict with the need to let information flow quickly. And finally, the law of the small team. Coming back to Amazon, they talk about the 2 pizza team. Now, pizza is a very American concept, but basically you could feed about 8 people on 2 pizzas in the US, and that, it turns out, is a pretty good size for a team. So the idea is to get business and technology working together efficiently so that they can focus on customer-centric products. And notice we also, a little bit more subtly here, is this customer centricity. We're not just performing a task. Together, we're creating something for the customer. So from his perspective, agility is the law of the network, the law of the small team, and the law of the customer. For a long time, we debated, is this really connected to agility of the software developers? Because, the top management, they don't feel a need to follow the example of software developers. But actually, when we put these 2 things together, they look very similar. Okay, the developers talked about doing things for the customers, and that's their purpose. Okay, we talked about learning, that's the law of the network. We talked about collaboration, that's the law of the small team. So actually, I think agility is, I'm just going to call it universally useful and universally applicable when you see it at this level. Okay, now when I talk to, come back to that list of things we saw at the beginning, when executives want their organizations to be better, most of what they're looking for maps pretty well to one of the 3 laws of agility. Okay, now agility, people have noticed that this is really working. Most of the top capitalized companies these days are all qualify as agile. They're not necessarily following any consultant's program for how to be agile, but they're very good at these 3 things. And in my humble opinion, Tesla and SpaceX, the Musk companies, are both extremely agile in their approach to doing things. And you see that by how quickly their products evolve. Now, agility has made it to the front page of the Harvard Business Review and gotten on the radar screen of executives. But notice there's also this kind of tinge of fear, because, well, agility is different than what we did before. And what is that going to mean for me as a manager? And everything I learned at school doesn't work anymore. So, kind of how do I take this forward? Okay, so just like anyone else in an organization, when you're worried about the security of your own job, it's hard to do the right thing for your organization. Now, what I'd like to do is remind you, the chat window is for questions. My Google form there is also for questions. I'd like to make sure we have a lot of, I haven't seen a single question yet, so this is your chance. If you got a question, please write it in. Okay, so what I'd like to do, I promised you 3 secrets. What I'd like to do is share 3 examples of successful leaders and reveal the secrets. Now, you didn't actually think I was going to reveal them all at once, did you? Okay, so let's take these one at a time. Let's start with the first one. Okay, many people are trying to tell you change is hard. I actually believe that change is easy if you want to do it. Okay, so, and I'm going to start with my own story. About a year and a half ago, I'll just say a little bit on the roly-poly side. I was 10 kilos overweight, and at some point I decided I wanted to do something about it. Now, this is an interesting problem because this is not, losing weight is not something that we usually think about that agility would be good for. Because agility, basically you got waiting, working, and done, and you move cards from left to right, and you get them done. But when you're trying to lose weight, well, it doesn't really fit that model now, does it? Okay, because you're going to eat anyway. Okay, what you want to do is eat less, or maybe eat differently. Okay, so how do you deal with that in an agile context? And I think this is really the leadership question. Now, how did I get started on this? A friend of mine told me, or asked me, have you ever noticed how you feel when you eat too many carbohydrates, when you've had too much sugar? And I said, no. Don't you get that sugar high, right after you've eaten it, and then maybe a little bit later you're kind of, oh yeah, maybe. Okay, and just talking about it sensitized me to the problem. And 2 days later, after, I don't know, a particularly carbohydrate-loaded lunch, I noticed, wow, this feels good. And then in the afternoon, God, I could barely move. Okay, and I came to this realization, oh yes, I see what carbohydrates do. I see how they make me feel, and I don't like it. And because I don't like it, I want to avoid them. Okay, so I got this nice simple statement. Because I don't like how sugar makes me feel, I want to avoid sugar and carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, by the way, they all reduce to sugar in your bloodstream. So they're nutritionally the same thing. Okay, and all of a sudden I had this very simple guidance. And so at the time this was happening, I was doing a lot of traveling, and I'd spend time in hotels, and hotels tend to offer breakfast that looks like this. And for me, looking at that was like a vegetarian at the meat counter. I said, oh, that's interesting, nothing for me here. And I go on to the next counter, and find something that I could eat. Okay, and so what's the model here? Well, this is the concept of leadership and vision. Okay, now the metaphor that we use in personal agility is the metaphor of navigation. So I'd like you to imagine that you're the captain of a ship, maybe before the days of GPS, and you're trying to reach a faraway destination, in this case, Jamaica. Okay, so Jamaica is a placeholder for whatever your goal is. So how would you, in the day, how would you get to navigate that? Try that again. How would you get to Jamaica? Well, the idea is quite simple. You plot a course, okay, and then you set sail, and then every once in a while you check your position and make sure that you're on course. Okay, so far so good. Now we have the question of what happens if you get caught in a storm. Okay, now the ocean isn't really a quiet place. There are currents, there are winds. When there's clouds, you can't see the stars anymore, so you can't navigate. Okay, oh, and there are waves. Although those waves might be crashing over the railing, so you can't even, you're so busy keeping the ship from sinking that you don't have any time to navigate. And even if you did have time, you couldn't see the stars, so you're kind of stuck. So what happens to your course? Well, you get blown off course. Okay, and so this is like having a long-term goal, but you're being distracted by all of these urgent things. Okay, now what happens is, after a while, the emergency subsides, the storm settles, the boat is no longer tipping and creaking and filling with water and stuff, and say, okay, where am I? Take a fix. Where is Jamaica? Oh, Jamaica's over there. So I have to turn, in this case, it looks like about 180 degrees or 100 degrees to the right. Now, I'm going to tell you about my storm. Okay. Not sure how many of you have had the opportunity to sample American chocolates. I'm originally from the US. These were basically my favorite chocolates growing up as a kid. And I'd lost about 8 kilos on my voyage to losing 10. And we're getting now close to Christmas time. And for some reason, everybody in my family decided I needed a half a kilo of these things. And so I ended up with about 2 kilos of these chocolates for Christmas. And they're good. And they're really good. And I tried to kind of push them off to other members of the family, but I wasn't very successful. And you know what? I did my duty. And by the end of Christmas, by the end of January, so about a month later, I'd eaten most of those 2 kilos of chocolate, okay? And remember I said I was trying to lose 10 kilos, I lost 8, well, I found 2 of them again, okay? And so now I have this great crisis. What do I want to do? Okay, do I want to get back on course? Okay, and I thought about it because I was really tempted. That sugar, that really tastes good. I like these chocolates. Maybe I should eat some more. And then I said, well, actually, I thought about it and I felt it. I still don't like how it makes me feel. I still feel overweight. and I want to stay on the course. And so I said, okay, I still want to get to Jamaica. And so set my course to the 100, in this case, 100 degrees to the right. And I'm now going back to Jamaica. And so I continued to avoid carbohydrates until I got down to what is basically my current weight today. And, so the idea is, if you want to go back on course, you can get there. All you have to do is say that you want to do it. Now, being able to navigate, being able to know where you are, this is now very helpful. So here is the thing. Change is easy if you want to do it. Imagine life is an ocean. You're the captain of the ship. You get to decide where it goes. Okay, so take command of your ship and you'll be fine. Okay, now at this point, I'm going to give you a friendly reminder to put some questions in the chat so we have something to talk about when the rest of my talk is finished. And let's go on to the second secret. Just want to keep you waiting a little bit. So, second secret, be clear on what really matters. So, one of the big challenges in an organization is how do you create alignment? Now, last summer, I had the opportunity to visit the Starmus celebration in Zurich, which is a celebration of science-based music and art. Somehow all these things come together. And it was the 50th anniversary of the Apollo mission, where the Americans put 2 men on the moon and brought them safely back to Earth. And this was actually the culmination of a thing called the space race between the Americans and the Soviet Union, which the Americans eventually won. And so the question is, why did they win and how did they do it? And so it's very interesting because over the course of a week, we had former flight controllers, former astronauts, former administrators, both from the American side and the Soviet side, and they talked about how they did it. And one of the things that distinguished the American side was this clarity of purpose. They said, we are going to the moon, okay? And so basically from the point where the moon, there was one project, one goal for the whole country. Now that was a mobilization of 400,000 people. It was almost, there was the civilian government, the military, the civil economy, all of them were contributing their part to get to the moon. And listening to these people talking, I'm now convinced that everybody in that project, all 400,000 of them, knew 3 things. The first one, we're going to the moon. Second point, it's not going to fail because of me. Okay, and if anything goes wrong, well, remember rule number 1, we are going to the moon. And this told everybody everything they needed to know to get to the moon, or to do the right thing. So they didn't have much discussion. They didn't have competition. One of the disadvantages, or one of the problems the Soviets had, is they actually had 3 different programs that were competing for the right to, go to the moon. And so they spent 3 years fighting with each other while the Americans were catching up from the 3-year disadvantage that they had, okay? So clarity of purpose, let's see how this works right now at a very personal level. So we've used it to, kind of help 400,000 people find their direction. How does it work for an individual person? Now, Jörg Ewald is the general manager of a small specialty manufacturer for aviation parts, basically for balloonists. They make altimeters. And he'd taken over the company and thought he could make the turnaround happen, and it wasn't going very well. And he had to lay off some people, and he was trying to compensate it by working very hard himself. Okay, and so he came to me. He says, I got so much to do. How do I know which to do? And so what we did is we sat down with a thing called the priorities map. Okay, and we figured out, well, what is he working on? What does he have to do? What's important? And this leftmost column is called what really matters. These are like the navigation stars that help him decide everything he does needs to support something that really matters. And he had about 7 items on his list. And I said, Jörg, what do all these things support? And he says, well, saving the company. And I said, okay, well, why don't you make save your company your top item? Okay, good. So he made save the company his top item. That was the end of our first session. We were meeting every 2 weeks. He later told me it took him about a week before he really started doing it. And then the second week he comes back, and so we review the board, talk about his priorities, help him pick what he's going to do next. And then just as he's walking out of the office, okay, second day, that's after a week of doing this, after a week, he's walking out of the office, it hits him. Okay, what happened? Well, he had changed his mind about the answer to what really matters. Okay, and he ran home and he told his wife about it right away. And he told, what he said is, darling, I want to save the company, but what I really want to do is have a decent life. And she says, oh, that's interesting. I mean, you've been working 80 hours a week. What does it mean to have a decent life? And he said, well, how about we go out to a movie tonight? Okay. And she was like, you haven't suggested that in over a year. Okay. So here is the thing. When you can get clear on what really matters and you can communicate that, the people around you will figure it out right away, and they'll already start orienting themselves differently around you. Okay, so if you can get clear on what really matters, okay, communicate it right away, people will notice the difference right away. And this is something that I've noticed in my work with personal agility. This clarity on what really matters can be transformational. You can completely change your life or either your project or your company on the basis of that. Okay, once again, I'm not seeing very many questions, but we will, now would be an excellent time to, actually, I am seeing some questions on the Google form. So if we might come in and do it that way at the end. So let's see, let's take a look at the third secret. Okay, so fair number of you, a lot of you are Agile practitioners. I didn't see anybody claiming to, there was one person. So Ahmed is developing software. It's good to know that we have at least one developer in the room, because here is the secret. Software developers, and I'm talking to leaders now, software developers have solved the biggest challenges, okay? How did software developers solve the problem of management? Well, let's look at the situation here. So I want to tell you the story. Walter is actually featured as one of our case studies on personal agility. He was the executive director of FutureWorks, a small, relatively small creative consultancy in Zurich. He wanted to make some changes to the company, so he was thinking about, I want to retire in a couple of years. And he was finding that change difficult, okay? So let's kind of look at what happened on a timeline, okay? So FutureWorks used to be part of a much larger partnership. The partners basically decided they wanted to go in different directions, so each partner took their share of the company, and FutureWorks became one of these partnerships. Now, Walter's situation is, he wanted to step back. He wanted the next generation of his leadership to take over the company, okay? So, he knew that they needed to make some changes. Sometimes we call this passing the torch. The problem is the torch is really heavy, and sometimes you have to, you got to make sure that there's someone who can actually carry the torch after you hand it over. So what they did is they decided to dedicate 10% of the leadership capacity of their, top 10 people. So top 10 people in the company, 10% of their capacity. So equal to, a full man year of capacity, and they gave themselves 2 years, okay? And they identified a number of things that they wanted to do, and they started to work. And well, time went on and time went on and time went on, and 2 whole years went by. And, this was the time box that Walter had set, and he realized after 2 years, how many of our goals have we achieved, okay? And the answer was basically none of them, okay? Now, it turns out that was a slight exaggeration. In 2 years of working on it, devoting 10% of the team, of the leadership's top capacity, they were able to create a new logo, okay, which they needed because they had a new company, okay? But somehow this wasn't addressing the real issues that they had. And in fact, by the second time around, it was becoming a bit more existential. Okay, now this is the point where I got involved, and we talked to, we introduced Scrum, we introduced personal agility, we introduced a lot of the Agile concepts that you would normally introduce in a development team. We introduced it in a leadership team, okay? So the situation was basically the same as before, except Walter committed to be part of the solution, point number 1, and we started out looking at Scrum and personal agility as the way to move forward. Once again, they dedicated 10% of their capacity to solving the problem at hand. But this time they said, we're going to work in iterations, or sprints as we call them, and we're only going to take on as much work as we feel we can get done in this 3-week sprint. Okay? Whoosh. Do you notice how quickly that went by? Well, I've looked at this presentation, 10 times to make sure that everything is correct, and that is to scale, both on the number of initiatives that they implemented and how long it took. Okay. All of the goal after 6 months, they had achieved all of their goals. Okay. And in fact, it gets better. They achieved all of their goals. Half of the ideas that they had on what they thought they had to do, they didn't need to do them. Okay. So basically, they got all the goals with half the work at a quarter of the time. Okay. Now here he said the results were already visible in the finances. When we wrote the case study, he kind of let me see a little deeper what's going on. This was really a save the company, from red ink to black ink kind of problem. Okay, and this is what he needed to see happen. Okay, so how did this happen? Well, first of all, his own commitment to make it a success. How he communicated with his team changed completely. We started talking about why. The what is secondary. Okay, we're going to have a conversation about what to do and how to do it. Okay, they were using Scrum, or a very, very lightweight version of Scrum, not the same Scrum that you would have at a development team where everyone's working 100%. They were still in this 10%, but when they were working on improving the company, they always worked in pairs. They always did a daily Scrum, every 3 weeks, sprint review, sprint retrospective. Okay, so this is really the question. Okay, if you got too much to do and not enough time to do it, what happens? Okay, well, in software development, we have practices like the daily stand-up and sprint planning and review and retrospectives, etc. Okay, and what we discover is that in development, these practices are very widespread. Okay, now I've done a couple of polls on this. And basically, if we get 10%, 15% of management doing this stuff consistently and at the leadership level, it's very unusual. Okay, so this agile approach to, bringing leadership teams together and having them solve problems together is almost unknown. Okay, now, so let's talk about this multitasking problem. Okay, you remember, this is you working on a task, one at a time. Okay, we do, if you have a standard task, if you don't have anything else to do, you can get it done in a week. Okay, well, if you have 5 of those tasks to do in parallel, what happens? Well, first of all, you've added a new task. Okay, you have to decide what to do, and all of your stakeholders have to agree on it. Okay, and that is hugely draining on your capacity. Okay, the rule of thumb says for each additional task you take on, you're going to lose 20% of your capacity. By the time you're doing 5 things in parallel, 3/4 of your capacity is getting wasted. What that means in reality is it takes you 20 weeks, almost half a year, to finish what you could have done in a week. Okay, so you're basically only getting a quarter done of what you actually could do. What Walter and his team noticed is that having so much going on at once created a lot of sloppy thinking about what they're trying to accomplish and being very unclear on what the goals are. Okay, so basically, if you want to improve your performance, one of the first things you can do is cut down on multitasking. And I've done polls on multitasking, and one of the things I've discovered is that most people are somewhere between 4 and 10. Okay, so they're safely into this zone of 5 things in parallel. And if anything, it looks like management, the leadership roles are even more strongly confronted with multitasking. Okay, so I believe that there's a huge potential to improve company performance. The simple way to do it, what we're doing is eliminating excessive multitasking. Another way to phrase it is we're introducing agility into management. Okay, so my suggestion to you, apply agility to leadership. If you're in a leadership role, start with yourself. Okay, ask your dev teams how they do that, and then start applying those techniques within your, to your own work. Okay, now, would you like to be the next FutureWorks? Well, how do you do it? Step one, start with yourself. Okay, you can actually apply a personal form of agility to your own life using the same tools and techniques. We have been collecting our case studies, everybody from students to struggling entrepreneurs to top executives. We've been finding that they can do that. So I'd like to invite you to come over to the Personal Agility website, maybe check out our recognition program. We got 3 levels of recognition. The first is for self-starters, self-teachers. The second is for people who want to take a course. The third is for people who want to do it professionally. I'm not going to say too much about it, but one of the things that we say is that at the very least, you're good at getting things done. At the professional level, you're good at getting things done. You're good at focusing, helping the organization figure out what it wants to do. Okay, and what we're seeing is who benefits is pretty much everybody. The executives who need to get their first experience with agility, team leaders and managers who are trying to figure out the new roles. One of the problems you often see with Scrum Masters is they come with a very strong follow the rules approach, but they have no heart, so they can't deal with unexpected things. Agile coaches, on the other hand, often have lots of heart, but no backbone, so we don't have that focus on business. And just about everybody needs to talk to stakeholders, okay? So what we're thinking is there's some very interesting things that you can do there. I'd like to invite you to check out my books or come to our website to find out more. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. It looks like most of the questions have gone to the web form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to the Q&A. And see what we have to say here. So hold on one second.
Hey, thanks for that, Peter. So we are waiting for it. I really liked it.
Thank you.
One thing I really liked is that the first secret you talked about. Change is easy if you want to do it. So you've got to have that intent, right? So that's
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So I was just trying to relate the agility that you talked about, right? Agility is about purpose, learning, and I guess it's network you talked about.
Yes, collaboration.
Collaboration, yeah, network. So how do I relate this to the secrets?
Well, so what were the secrets? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the secrets. So I guess the last secret I think is perhaps the most obvious one is that basically what Agilists do is they apply these 3 rules or these 3 principles: learning, collaboration, and purpose. They're summarized in a lot of practices. And surprisingly, these practices are hugely powerful, either at a personal level or at a leadership level. Okay. The purpose, if you will, the first 2 were mostly about purpose. Okay. If you want to change, if you want to do it, you can do it. Okay, by being clear on what you're doing and why you're doing. The second was about communicating the purpose, and the third is about collaborating with each other. Okay, so we good with that?
I'm good with that. Thank you.
Okay.
So I have a first question from Chandru. He asks, how to coach management towards improving agile process?
How to coach management. Okay. What I'd like to hear is how to coach is pretty easy. You ask questions, you invite people to think about the problem, create awareness about what the problem is, create awareness about what a good solution would be, maybe identify what's making it difficult to get to this good solution, and start helping them figure out the problem so they can get to the desired solution. But that's kind of the basics of coaching, and somehow I don't think that's the question that's being asked. So maybe could we invite this person, maybe turn on their microphone and ask them to explain the question?
Yeah, I can do that. Maybe.
Yes. So what's the challenge here?
Chandru. Chandru, you are allowed to talk. You can ask the question live.
Hi, Steve, good morning. So the question is, see, so how to coach means to get them to make understanding if this thing that mindset. So what are the things I can share to them if implement, if you start with the start with the Scrum. So in terms of transformation from waterfall to the agile.
Okay. The sound here wasn't very good, so I'm not really sure that I understood it. Did you can you help me on that?
Chandru, your voice was breaking a bit. Can you talk again? Can you ask again?
Can you hear me, Steve, now?
Yes, go on.
Yeah. So actually, my question is a transformation from waterfall to the agile. So how can I coach the agile management to adopt the agile process? So to start with the initial pilot Scrum team. So what are the key things I have to share to make them to understand, to coach them? So because
Okay.
they don't know, they are very new to the management, the people who manage it, they don't know about the in-depth knowledge about
Okay.
the Scrum, the frameworks, nothing. They look for the delivery only. So they don't understand the team has to be grow in maturity, right? So there is a team. So there is from this Walter's this story I learned there is a time to take for the team to get maturity and process improvement, everything to take place. So how can in initial stage how can I make them to understand, to coach them in terms of agile?
Okay. So
To improve the
okay, I think I've understood the question. Kind of how do you start that conversation with the executives? How do you get them to consider the possibility that there might be a different way of doing things? The tool of the coach is to ask questions. And what we're striving for is what we call powerful questions. Okay, so some questions you ask them a question and the answer just rolls off their tongue. They don't have to think. Those don't help you very much. What you want are the questions that sit where they kind of have to think about it. Okay, so I found that a very interesting place to start is at the personal level. Okay, so what have you been working on? How have you been spending your time for the last 2 or 3 weeks? Okay, think about those tasks. What have you been doing? Now reflect. How many of those tasks have brought you value, and how many of them were just busy work? How much of that was just busy work, things that you had to do to satisfy something, whereas how much was really advancing you forward? Okay, and what would it be like if you could spend more of your time on things that advance your objectives and less of your time on busy work? Okay, and what you're doing now is introducing him to or her to the concept of visualizing their work, prioritizing their work, and the idea that, well, all of the work costs you time or costs you money, and some of it brings you value. So we want to focus on the stuff that brings value. And what you're doing here is you're taking these practices that you see in, for instance, the backlog of Scrum, and vision and prioritization, and you're making it personal and bringing it down to earth for him. Okay, and usually that's already a bit of an aha moment when they say, oh man, yeah, I'm wasting a lot of time here. And then the next thing to do is to say, okay, well, let's start making this visible. And then you introduce them to Post-its. You have them write down their tasks and put the Post-its on the wall, waiting, working, done. Okay, and then show them how that works. Okay, and then they start to see how it works for themselves. And the interesting thing about it is if anyone comes into their office, they see it too. And then they can say, oh, what's that? And then the executive can say, well, let me tell you about my priorities map. Okay, and all of a sudden, instead of being dependent on their coaches and consultants and people 3 decks below their watch, they can now talk from a position of authority about this cool agile stuff that they're doing. Okay, so notice you're giving them some experiences which change their perspective. Then they see value in it. Then all of a sudden they can have a much more productive conversation with the people who want to do that in the teams. Okay, so that's kind of my basic strategy. Okay, and I've seen task boards go through an organization like wildfire, when, you know, one of the key people like the CFO has one on his wall. Okay, it's really amazing. And I've had people in the board of directors explain to me the value of Scrum to them, you know, because, you know, all of a sudden they see how it works and they say, oh yeah, we can make, you know, fine-grained decisions about what brings value and what lowers risk and what doesn't. And the stuff that brings us value, we want to do more of and quicker, and the stuff that doesn't, we want to do less of and later. And so, you know, all of a sudden, you know, when they're in the process and they're explaining it to you, well, that makes your life much easier.
Yeah, that's a very good explanation, and it's very relatable as well. You start with that person and you start changing the perspective first, then move towards behaviors through mindset change.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Steve, for that. Hope that answered your question, Chandru. And I guess in line with that, Kamal has asked, what would be your first question to a CEO of a company who's resistant towards change? What steps should we take forward?
Okay. This is one of those great it depends questions, and it always depends a bit on the context. You know, my first question is always, why are we here? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Okay. You know, why do you need to have, you know, why do we need a solution? Okay. What is the best possible outcome? What's the outcome that you're trying to achieve? Okay. So, you know, what I have discovered is that particularly when you look at the leadership layers of an organization, these people are very competitive with each other often. Obviously, you know, I'm speaking in generalities here, but there's a lot of competition. And you can kind of notice this in how they talk, okay? Do they let each other finish their sentences, okay? And if the answer is no, that means they're always trying to get their point across. And it turns out there's kind of a jujitsu here, you know, kind of turning their forces, you know, their own energy against them. And the basic technique here is to listen, okay? You know, and then what you do is you ask them questions, thought-provoking questions, you know, and then really listen to the answers, okay? And then when they're finished speaking, you say, okay, I heard you say A, B, and C. Have I understood you correctly? And they'll say, yes. And you say, okay, is there anything else? Oh yeah, there's also D. Oh, okay, there's D, okay? And they're so amazed that you're actually listening to them, and you get this little confirmation, have I understood you correctly, okay? You know, and you know, so this is where they feel heard. And one of the interesting side effects of this process is because you've listened to them, they're now willing to listen to you. Okay, and so I've discovered that after listening to this, okay, I might listen to them for 5 minutes on a particular question, and then I get to say 2 sentences which give them something to think about. Oh, in my experience, we also need to pay attention to that because this causes that, and that's going to cause us problems. Ah, okay, okay, you know, and so all of a sudden, you know, you take on a much more subtle leadership form, and this is what I have found has been most effective with executives. My, again, personal experience.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Peter. So I have one more question from Tejas. What would you advise to the Scrum Masters on their way to become a coach? What basics should they take?
I'm glad we got to Tejas because he was also the first person to put a question into my Google form. What would you advise on the way to become a coach? Okay. Actually, I probably recommend my personal agility workshop or the book on personal agility, because one of the things about personal agility is it's really a coaching format. Okay, and we try to introduce you into how to coach. So you know, I think if I were going to pick one thing to learn about coaching, I would learn about powerful questions. What's a powerful question? Okay, and learn about getting permission. Okay, you know, you can only coach someone if they're in agreement with it. If you try to force it on them, it doesn't work. And I say this having tried to coach my teenage kids, that doesn't work very well. Well, now they're old enough. It's much easier. But there was a phase where that was really challenging. You know, and at some point you just can't do it. But you know, later they're receptive. Okay, so you know, so one thing is ask for permission. You know, and they say, okay, what's the problem? Okay, is now a good time to talk about it? Okay. If you're going to be a coach, one thing to remember is it's never about you and it's never about your solution. It's about their solution. And there's a lot of confusion about this in the marketplace, because a lot of so-called agile coaches are really agile consultants. Okay, they've been hired to tell people how to do things. And I think part of the problem is the way we hire people. We say, oh, here is a problem to solve, here is a task to do. Who can do that? Oh, we need someone to coach. But the problem is, by the time the person who has the authority to decide to hire the coach has made that decision, they've already thought through how they're going to do it, and they're no longer willing to listen to the coach as they try to talk them through the problems. There's kind of a chicken and egg problem here. The egg is already there, and then the chicken isn't quite what we want. So, what do we do next? Okay, but I would say, start with powerful questions. Definitely check out Personal Agility, the book. You can still download it for free, because it's still kind of in public beta. That might not be true for much longer. So if you want to get one, get it soon. You'll see that we've got a lot of tips on how to get started with coaching there.
Yeah, thanks for that. So that certainly fits that firmly that what I believe. It's like we are generally generous at our heart. We tell people what to do. Stop that and ask questions. Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, next a question from Gaurav. He asks, the secret one, change is easy if you want to do it. It is good at an individual level. How would it work for an organization? What is secret ingredient for organization transformation to agile? Specifically from doing agile to being agile.
Okay. One of the things that I've discovered is that if you have a conversation about people with their best projects, let them think about everything they've ever done from, whenever they finish school up to whatever they're doing today. Pick a project that they say, hey man, I wish every project could be like this. Okay, you start with that. Okay, and if you're doing this, this works great as a group exercise. It's called Remembering Heaven. You'll find it on my blog. So you let people tell their stories, okay? And, there are a number of approaches to achieving consensus where you can, basically identify, let's say you've got 30 people in the room. You pick out the 3 best stories of the 30 people in the room. What are the projects that we'd like to emulate moving forward, okay? And then you look at these 3 projects and you start to deconstruct them and say, well, what made these projects such great projects? And it turns out, the characteristics are usually the same. You've got leadership that supports you. You've got a clear vision. You usually produce stuff fairly often, and you had a commitment to quality, and you had a clear line of sight to the customer. And, kind of the same things show up over and over and over. Okay. And then you start looking at what something like Scrum is trying to do, and you discover that it's very much aligned with your best projects. Okay, so and this by looking at your own experience and comparing that to Scrum and Agile, or other Agile frameworks, you discover that they're very similar, and that takes away a lot of the fear. The next question you get to ask is, how many of you are working on your best project today? When you think about all those projects that you thought of, how many people in the room told the story of whatever it is they're doing now? Okay, and this is a really interesting question. Depending on who's in the room, I may even ask people to close their eyes, while they hold up their hands, so that they feel safe to vote, or maybe they will, maybe we'll have them vote on a secret ballot and then count the secret ballots, the yeses and the nos. What I found is that unless they're already doing some flavor of Agile or of some flavor of an Agile framework, most people aren't. Okay. 10% is not an uncommon answer, among 30, somewhere between 3 and 5. Anything significantly above 20 or 30%, there's probably Scrum or Agile already in place. I've seen 0. I've seen it where nobody is working on their best project, okay? And so the next question is, how many of you would like to be working on your best project? How many of you think your colleagues would like to be working on your best project? And it turns out when you look at it like that, almost everybody wants to get on board. Now, oddly enough, the only people who don't really feel comfortable with that are usually the management. They say, wait a minute, we're not here to have good projects, we're here to have great results, okay? Well, this is kind of the second layer of, well, how do we connect those good projects with great results? But, as Joe Justice would say, motivation is a multiplier for performance or velocity. Motivation multiplies velocity, okay? And so great results are associated with high performance teams and happy teams, okay? So, this is how I go about trying to get buy-in. The leaders, you might have to address them in a different way, but in terms of getting the organization on board, I actually think that that's not a difficult thing to do. I can go into an organization, lead them through this exercise, and I have high confidence at the end of the day, they'll want to do it. I'm not sure it will convince their management, but it will convince most of the people who are actually doing the work.
Absolutely. Thanks for your words of wisdom. Quick time check. It's 7:01. We're already 1 minute over. So thanks for that, Peter. So I'm going to share my screen. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone who have joined.
Okay. But just before you jump off, I've put my LinkedIn contact in the chat. If anyone would like to join me, connect with me, they'd be more than welcome to do so. If I didn't answer your question, ping me on LinkedIn, and I will, and I'll follow up with you on the question.
That's a great gesture. Thanks,
okay.
Peter.
Okay. And someone is asking about the PowerPoint for this. I have an extremely similar version already on SlideShare. I'll share that with you. I'll find the link and share that with you so that you can share that with the participants.
Yeah, sure. That would be great. Thanks, Peter. So,
okay, thank you.
Thanks again. We really learned a lot from your wisdom. And before we close the upcoming webinars that we have good speakers coming up, we have Brock and Erkan speaking on in the next week. They're talking about integrated agile, and there are quite a few speakers lined up as well. So see you again. Thanks everyone again.
And thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you, Peter.